So let's go into the various selection tools and selection modes that we have in Softimage XSI. You'll find them under the Select menu, under Tools and Modes. Now obviously as you become accustomed to the various keyboard shortcuts, you find you won't be using these menus at all, but it's good if you need to look up something or for a quick just click in there. Right, now let's go first over our various selection modes. We have the various modes. You can find basically the standard selection filters right here or under modes. Point, edge, whether raycast or not, polygon, etc. So under points, simply press T, you select some points, select an empty space to deselect them, or Control-Shift-A to deselect everything. Polygons, again, simply just surround them. Edges, simply click into and rectangle select them, and it will actually select all of the edges. Now all of these rectangle selects are actually going through the object, so as you're selecting things in front, it's also selecting things behind that are occluded by the object. So in order to get around this, we also have what's called raycast selection. Now this would be, for example, for polygons, if you press U, and you can simply paint on more or less your selection. You can see that it's not actually going through the object, selecting occluded polygons. Similarly for edges, we can just simply press I and you'll select but not select occluded edges. Furthermore, we have something called an extended selection. Now you'll see that I have edges selected right here. Now let's say, for example, I wish to add some points to this selection. Simply by holding Shift T, T for tag, I now move into my point mode, as you see here, but I'm retaining my edge selection. So now I have points and edges selected. If I now went into, for example, Shift U, I could add some polygons to that selection. So now I have edges, polygons, and points selected at the same time. So multiple component types selected at the same time, which is very, very useful under certain circumstances. Okay, so let's go a little bit into the various selection tools that we have. We also have several selection tools, each of which can be very, very useful in given circumstances. So obviously the standard selection tool you'll find is the rectangle select, especially for example, for tag points. We just basically everything under the rectangle gets selected, and as we mentioned before, it does go through the object, so is selecting occluded objects or components as well. The next would be the lasso tool. Now the lasso tool, very similar to the rectangle select tool, but it has the advantage that it is actually raycast. So as I select here, it's not selecting occluded points. Right. So for example, if I select here in the front and go to the back, nothing is selected, or nothing should be. Okay. So you'll notice that actually if I select around the eye, the possibility may arise that something is selected and back, mainly because the eye is a hole, and any polygon behind this, because it's a hole, or any point, will no longer be occluded. So if you do have holes in your geometry, keep that in mind. Raycast will not see that as a boundary. Finally, if we go into, or next, if we go into Freeform. Freeform is a very, very useful selection tool in that not only does it allow you to simply paint on, for example, your selection, something like that, but it also remembers the order in which you've selected. So this is extremely useful in the case of, for example, selecting curves in a specific order, or, for example, chain items. Now, where this could be a good example is I've created some curves here, and I've actually not retained the order that they were created in, so I've jumbled them around a little bit. So if I use these this rectangle select tool and create a loft, for example, out of it, you'll find that the loft is actually sort of not right, mainly because it's using the curves in the wrong order, namely in their named order, or naming order. Now, this could be a problem, except of course we have the Freeform selection tool, and what that does is it not only selects them but also remembers the order in which they've been selected. So if I now redo that, you'll find that the loft is now perfectly correct because it knows in which order the curves are supposed to come into. Right, so that's the Freeform tool, very, very useful, especially for that. Now, raycast, we've seen very simply just going on there and actually raycasting onto the object, basically painting your selection on one at a time. Now, we also have a paint tool, which is just a little bit more advanced, basically allowing you to use a brush to paint on your selection, also resizing it. This is very, very useful for selecting in complex models. Then finally, of course, we have under Tools our Rectangle Raycast. And what Rectangle Raycast does is it basically is the same as your rectangle selection, except it also adds that raycast property.